Live from Atlanta, Georgia, it's a Zach Ballinger show where we help you find your directions through passion and purpose. My name is Zach Ballinger. I am your host. Thank you guys so much for joining us today. We do really appreciate it. Today's a career expert half hour. This is about your career, your development, your journey. You can ask us questions on YouTube, enter those into the comment section. We'll make sure to get to them, as well as Zach at zachballinger.com. You can email those questions before the show. We'll make sure to ask them. John, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thank you for having me, Zach. It's a pleasure to be on.
So, John, before we jump in and start helping some of these people, we just want to ask you a little bit about your background and what you do.
Yeah, so my specialty and focus is on specifically the resume and penetrating the evil robot, as people call it, the ATS system. Part of how I got here was in HR, many years in sales and marketing, combined with the MBA, and kind of had that vision and had that, as they would call, 2 o'clock in the morning moment where I found my secret sauce and my secret weapon of how to help job seekers at a greater rate than the 1.1, I think it's 1.1 million writers and coaches on LinkedIn that don't seem to have that specific niche or have that specific set of skills and results. So that's my focus every morning when I get up is how many clients can I get to that next level? How many clients have I gotten hired this year? How many clients have had interviews this week? I'm very much focused on their success.
So on the topic of resumes, what are some of your key, for people out there listening, a lot of questions are centered around resumes. What are your 3 or 4 major tips?
Yeah, I kind of approach it as it's a two-sided coin analogy. You need to have start at your target, whether your target as a job seeker is, in the stage of being prepared for an opportunity. It might be a 100-foot wide target that you're trying to align to, or if you're specifically applying to a job, again, start at the target, but it might be a bullseye this time. And then you're going to work your way backwards in terms of the narrative, the format, keywords, and aligning specifically to an opportunity. So that's the first side of the coin, is based on the content and the keywords. The other side, which people often need help with, is quantifying. It's a hard thing to do on your own. That's why there are people like myself and others out there to help job seekers do that. But start thinking in terms of how you are measured in the role, and make sure your resume is communicating value, showing the hiring manager what value you can bring to their team, because that's ultimately why they hire you. So do away with the bullet points, Zach, of responsible for, and make it outcome driven and metric driven.
Awesome. And so thank you for the tips on there. The question that comes in is, how do you begin to find, let's say you're stuck in a job 5 to 10 years down the road. You wake up, you realize this is something that you were kind of just pushed into, or you got a job because you were in college and you decided to do this, but you're not very happy. Mm-hmm. What are some things people can do tangibly and strategically to start to change that path?
Yeah, so I think you got to look at things in terms of job function and industry. If you don't like the function you're in, it's a lot easier hurdle to make that move within the industry to a different function. But too often people try to do different function, different industry. Not to say it can't happen, but it's a double hurdle. So look at what experience you do have. Oftentimes the soft skills and those will transfer across industries. But think in terms of really how hiring managers and HR think is, has he or she had this function? Have they worked in this industry? And approach it that way.
Gotcha. And so the question that comes in, this seems like from someone that's in near retirement age, they say they continually get denied for jobs. Does age discrimination exist, and what can you do to overcome that?
Yeah, so I've been quoted as saying I think it does exist over 40. I think we always want to use that rule of thumb on both LinkedIn and resume and how you're presenting yourself and cap it at 15, maybe 20 years. You're not going to see very many jobs that have that requirement of 28 years of experience. So you don't need to have your college graduation date of 72 and your first job 1975. That doesn't need to be on your resume. So there are things that you can do in terms of time frame, and then ultimately, working your network. It's a fact, as you probably know, Zach, 70% of director plus level jobs, if that's the level that this person is at, are filled either internally or by an internal referral. So that's where you maybe switch up your strategy that I often see of a lot of applications, little time networking, building connections using LinkedIn. And maybe we'll get more in depth on LinkedIn, but that tool and that platform specifically should be for 95% of your time should be on either creating content to get found or adding people at target companies. And those conversations can often overcome any job hurdles and anything else that someone may have.
Yeah, and I think it is a real thing. And, one of my friends that is older, he's been able to land jobs in top, echelon leadership positions. He's got a lot of military experience on his resume. And so one of the perceptions of him is he's older, stubborn, not willing to change. So in the interview, he articulates what he's doing in this moment to change. So he's taken online classes. He realizes the perception of people might be that he's stubborn to change. So he demonstrates in the interview through the answers that, hey, look what I'm doing here. I'm taking this leadership. I'm reading these new books. Here's some of the new leadership techniques I've implemented. So really talking about that, as well as, this isn't my 2-year plan. I've got a left. I'm hungry. I'm willing to work. I want to work for this company. This is what I want to do. This is the value I can bring. So it's really articulating that in the job interview as well.
Yeah, and I think to push back on that, one other point would be most older job seekers will relate to the comment of, I just want to have a conversation. If you get me in the room or you get me on the phone, it's going to go well. I'm good at explaining my value, talking about my experience. They just need that opportunity. And that's to my point about LinkedIn. Create conversations, whether it be an informative interview, but you can overcome a lot of hesitation with an actual conversation. So I think that's an important point to make. And then on the age factor, final point, because I deal with this a lot, as you can imagine, like you do, is make sure you're taking the position and the seat that you're interviewing that company. There are companies, I won't name names, but are renowned for wanting 19-year-old kids, 20-year-old graduates of college. And if you're an older job seeker and that's the reputation of the company, you know what, you're not going to change that culture, but find the company that is going to value your experience and don't hide from it.
Gotcha. And the next question comes in is, what's your opinion on LinkedIn Learning? Does it help? And what advice do you have on it?
Yeah, I do like the fact that it's, and it came up actually earlier in a post I responded to about, filling in that gap. A lot of people, unfortunately, with the pandemic and the unemployment rate have had some gaps in the last year. It shows, I think, to your earlier point of continued learning. The fact that it adds it to your profile shows activity. It promotes it and throws it out to your network. Any kind of way you can appear and get in people's feed as well as add continued skills, I think it's very valuable.
Awesome. Now, the next question comes in is, how do I know when to quit my full-time job? I'm currently working a side hustle and need to know the right moment to quit. I feel like if I quit my full-time job, I'm be able to make more money with my part-time side hustle.
Yeah, so a lot of that comes down to, I think, individual um, willingness to take a risk, right? I turned this side hustle into more than a full-time job, but I took the risk of leaving a job, not knowing where this would go back in the many years ago. And so if someone's threshold for taking some risk, and we've seen, an uptick in freelance and opportunities where people are using that entrepreneurial skill set. If you're tolerant for risk and you want to go all in on your side hustle, then I would advise doing that. Sometimes being under that pressure and having that mortgage due when when there's no guarantee, sometimes it brings out the best in people. So I always encourage taking some risk. In terms of leaving a particular job, I think the hindsight's often I should have left my bad company or my terrible culture 6 or 8 months ago. It's always in the rear view, and so that can certainly push people to the brink of doing that. But you got to take some risk in order to quit a job when you don't have one or start your own endeavor.
Yeah, I agree with you. I would say one caveat is make sure your boat's close enough to the dock before you jump in. So if
Yeah.
if you're doing a lawn care business and you're making $500 a month and you're used to surviving on 100,000 a year, that might be a difficult leap of faith. And
Right.
so let's bring that income a little bit closer on the side hustle to where you're able to balance out all your financial obligations and then
Right.
go for it. So maybe we get that income towards 50 a year and we say, okay, now if we spend an extra all my full-time effort on this, we can get up to the same amount of income or a little bit more than what we were
Right.
doing. So just kind of balance out the financial risk as well as when you assume that. But I agree with you. It takes some amount of risk to go into any business that you do. But the beauty about side hustles is you kind of know where you're trending. And so, I've started many side hustles that didn't make it, quite frankly. And then I've started
Right.
other ones that made it. And so the
Right.
closer you have a sense of your income, and that kind of tends to tell you what you're better at as well, I think, sometimes too.
Yeah. Yep. And I left a toxic culture, and I'll tell you that the day of and especially the day after, and I share this story with clients a lot, that paycheck going down to zero, I actually felt better than when I had the guarantee because of how bad it was. So sometimes, it's not always about money. If you have some savings built up, the relief of getting out of an environment where you're not going anywhere, you're not supported, and it's a bad work environment. Oftentimes, people make decisions to stay for the money, but in reality, they'd have the same, feedback at the end of, I wish I left 6 months ago, even if it meant, living off savings for a little bit. I just feel physically and mentally better. So.
Yeah, I think a lot of times too, once people hone in on their passion and they understand their purpose, they start to develop that skill. They end up making more money than they ever were into a quote unquote secure job, which I
Right.
always say there's no such thing as a
No
secure
such thing
job.
anymore. No.
Okay, and so the next question is during the pandemic, I've had to interview virtually. This has been a big shift for me as I'm used to in-person interviews. Is there any key tips you would have in virtual interviewing?
Yeah. So, I mean, just like you may rehearse general interview techniques pre-COVID, rehearse pandemic interview techniques. Use the webcam, use your phone, use your camera to actually record yourself. Make sure you're coming in clearly on your sound. Make sure you're focusing on the camera. Make sure you're comfortable in interviewing virtually because it is different and something that a lot of people had not done before. But I always, in terms of interviewing, I always relate to a professional athlete, and they talk about being in the zone, and they talk about how great a game they played. Well, they get there because they have a routine. They get there because they have a process. And whether it's virtual interviewing or in person, take those principles of Michael Jordan scoring 60 points to your interviewing in terms of, I think, Zach, about basketball, right? Great free throw shooters, they dribbled the ball 5 times every time. They spun it once and they made the shot. Interviewing, you need a process or you're going to get off in tangents. And some of the process is, understanding STAR, understanding and having a good elevator intro, doing all those things, but treating it like it's your game day prep and put yourself in that position where you can execute, one interview after another.
Said this on a previous show, but I believe employers are now at a disadvantage because if you think about it, if you're a job interview, it's almost like you have the questions to the test already. You know what they're going to ask you pretty much. So guess what? You have the advantage. It's just up to you to spend the time, the practice, and the opportunity to articulate that in a job interview. And so, all the things that I recommend, a mock interview, I think you should mock interview virtually too. I think it's a really important skill to have. You want to make sure you have a secure internet connection. Try to go to a quiet area to avoid noises and things like that, and just different nuances to a virtual interview. But I can definitely understand where if you're not used to doing a Zoom interview, it can be pretty intimidating. I know in this show format, it was a lot different for me because before COVID, I was used to interviewing people face to face. And now I've kind of gotten used to this. I kind of like it a little bit better, to be honest with you.
Yeah. You have to adjust, right?
Absolutely. So the next question comes in. How important are cover letters?
Yeah. So funny enough, a lot of people do ask me that question in terms of clients. And a lot of clients, believe it or not, spend a lot of effort and a lot of focus in adjusting the cover letter for the job, and they think the job they're applying for, and they think that's enough. In fact, the adjustment should be to the resume and less about the cover letter. I think at this point, 2021, it's a formality. Make it concise, make it about why you are interested in the company. So definitely customize that, but put your efforts more so into customizing the resume, which is actually scored through their Workday or Oracle ATS system, and less on the cover letter.
Gotcha. Makes a lot of sense. Now, as far as resume length, that's been a topic. What's kind of your advice on resume? 1, 2, 3 pages, and what stages in the career?
Yeah, so I think the general rule of, over 10 years, you can go into a second page. I think a lot of it depends on job function as well. I look at things in terms of keyword matching all day long. So if someone's in IT and they have been in IT for 5 years and they're looking to make that step up, those job descriptions will often have 60, 70, 80 keywords. You're not going to fit that in one page and make it readable. Maybe one application, it's a short job description, and maybe you trim some out and make it one page. So I think adapting to your job function is important. There's obviously less keywords and skills in a sales account manager job than there is in a program manager or director of IT. So I think it depends on your target. Make sure you have enough content to consume and spread out those keywords that are going to be required to match.
Absolutely. And I'd say for college students, shouldn't be more than a page, especially when you first graduate and most times. And then, of course, your academics, those will tend to be a little bit longer, what they call CVs and things like that. And then leadership positions, CEOs can have anywhere from 15 to 20 pages. Again, it's kind of going back to what you said. It's kind of based on your job function. Those keywords, I like that. The keywords in the job search can tell you a lot about, really, you can kind of match it up to see how long your resume should be. Employers don't spend a lot of time on them, to be quite frank. And so, I was talking to a gentleman who was at MIT who had started many businesses, and he said he looked at a resume about 15 seconds was his average, which is a little bit more than the normal. So
it's about 8 seconds, right? That's the stat going around. And typically, I make this joke often, going back to the ATS, make sure you have enough of the key skills in that resume to match the description, but don't kid yourself for a second that a C-level hiring manager even knows what an ATS is or knows what the keywords are. They often don't, and it's that one end of the hallway HR telling the C-suite, well, sir, ma'am, the reason that the resumes are 2 pages are because we have this thing called Workday and we have all these keywords, and that's how we're making the cut. Point being, the executive hire manager is looking back to the impact, and they're not looking at keywords or skills as much as HR is. So, again, satisfy both columns. Your HR requirement is more skill focused and keyword focused to get the eyeballs on it for the 8-second or 15-second read, and then the quantifiable impacts are for the hiring manager.
And then, John, last question that we've got on our agenda here asks about LinkedIn. What are some of the tips and the ways you can use LinkedIn to secure a job? Networking. So devote and commit to, just like you're measured in your job, or your boss or former boss may have given you goals for the week. Set yourself a goal for LinkedIn. Maybe it's, and as you know, it's not always a quantity thing, it's a quality. One connection can change your life on LinkedIn. Set a goal of maybe 5 connections at target companies a week. That's not asking a lot. Maybe it's 60 minutes a day on LinkedIn, not 20 hours. Job seekers tend to go to, they're online 9 hours, 10 hours a day. They see that I'm on there, but that's where my business is, so I should be. But you, job seeker, you should be on there an hour, hour and a half. Set a time limit so you get some balance and you're not using your time unwisely. But make 60 out of the 90 minutes about content, adding comments, adding likes, writing articles, posting a video, and connecting the people at target companies, and 10 minutes out of that searching for new jobs and applying. Instead, most people flip that and do 80 minutes on job applying and 10 minutes on looking at content. Yep.
So flip it.
It's a famous career coach, Ken Coleman, says a resume without relationships dead. And so the whole point about that is to have a connection and a power behind that resume so you can have a face with it. And then LinkedIn, I love that advice. And also make sure to keep it positive and professional. The last thing you wanted to be commenting on is your political views, your religious views, everything like that, or getting into fights. I've seen that. Believe it or not, it happens where people get really nasty and negative on there. And that's about the last social media platform you want to do that on. Because everybody can see those comments. There's an algorithm that pops up. And so I can see sometimes what John comments on, or what John can see what Zach comments on. So keep that in mind.
And I've seen, believe it or not, I've seen many venting posts about a particular company, and even sometimes naming a recruiter about how they were ghosted, and that certainly is not your way to secure a conversation or a job. So even though it might be frustrating, I see a lot about the evilness of ATS and how it's not selecting the right people. I always advise learn to play the game. The rules aren't going to change, but to your point, don't put things out there, especially belittling companies or people that you may have not had a great experience with. That's not something that HR wants to see.
Exactly. John, this has been so helpful. Thank you so much. We know you're really busy. You've got your own, career side business going, or well, you're a full-time business actually. Where can people get in touch with you? Let's say they've listened to this interview. They're like, hey, I would like to work with John or like to connect with him. What's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, on my LinkedIn page. I don't know if we can share on YouTube. I'll click in the comments and put my URL there. But certainly check me out on LinkedIn. I'm open networker, so I accept all connections, and would love to hear about you and see if we could possibly work together.
And that's a great way, because a lot of times people ask me, well, Zach, who can I link in with? Well, you got two right here. He just gave you his LinkedIn information, basically. So there's a connection right there. John, thank you so much for joining the show and providing all your insights. This has been great.
Thanks, Zach. Thanks for having me.